You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Chris Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. Ladies and gentlemen, there are these things that makes it official. Welcome to the big show. As always, for 16 years and 2,400 episodes, 2,700 episodes, we bring the Chris Voss Show, and they just keep growing that fast. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss1 on the TikTok, and all those crazy places on the internet. Opinions expressed by guests on the podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the Chris Voss Show. Some guests of the show may be advertising on the podcast, but it is not an endorsement or review of any kind. Today's featured author comes to us from bookstolifemarketing.co.uk. With expert publishing to strategic marketing, they help authors reach their audience and maximize their book success. Today, we have an amazing young man back on the show with us today for a second appearance for his book called Sede Vacante, Part 1, Dogmatic Ecclesiology Applied to Our Times. Did I get the title of that right, Griff?
Close enough. Ecclesiology is the way they say it, but anyway, okay. Good enough.
Okay.
Let's move on.
I got the Sede Vacante right?
Yes.
There we go. I'm learning Catholicism as I go. So we'll be talking to him about his insights in his book and everything. Griff was born in 1958. He found faith without the luxury of religious upbringing, and at a time when Catholicism itself had lost its identity. His writings reflect many years of research into Christian history and theology and ecclesiology. He lives with his wife, Juliet, and son, Martin, on the Central California coast. Welcome to the show, Griff. How are you?
Well, still doing fine. Ready
still
for another
doing fine.
One here.
When I talked to you earlier, you were doing fine too on the other show. So people can check that show out as well. Search for his name on both shows, The Chris Voss Show, and you'll find him. So give us any.coms. Where do you want people to look you up on the interwebs?
I can only give you the same ones I gave you before. The best place to find me is that on YouTube, my channel is Mr. Ubi Petrus, MRUBIPETRUS, Mr. Ubi Petrus. That's my YouTube channel. I'll be uploading, I've got other videos on there pertaining to all of these kinds of issues. So all right. That's really the best way. Yeah.
So give us a 30,000 over. Give us a 30,000 overview. What's inside your book?
So this book is really about the theology itself of all of this, or the ecclesiology. That's just a particular of the theology of the church itself, how it's structured, how it's run, and what doctrines apply to describe the church to itself, to everybody else. So that's different from the resurrection book, which is a history of all the various heroes of the faith that have preserved the church through these trying times. Now it's more a matter of backing up a bit and saying, so what are we doing? How can we justify our existence? And in particular, I think the Sede Vacante finding, do we really have a pope? In the Catholic sense of the word, I know that we do not. Now, people can call somebody at Vatican City a pope. They went through the motions of pretending to, but I think they had to know as well as they're not really doing that. If he uses the word pope, I think he's using it in the same sense that he could use any old word. He could have called himself first citizen, president, grand poobah with equal, relevance. A pope in the Catholic theological sense of the word means a successor to the Apostle Peter. It is the one person at any given time to whom is handed basically the responsibility of the whole church, no matter how big it gets. You don't delegate, your responsibility. You can have people helping you. That's what the cure is about. But you're the one who makes the final decisions. You're the one who puts out everything official, and you're the one that the Holy Ghost is expecting to, preserve as being infallible, so that we will not be led astray. We won't be learning something today that, we made a mistake. We got to unlearn that. Here's the new truth for tomorrow. You don't want to have a religion like that. Really don't want to have anything like that. Well, science can progress. We used to believe in phlogiston. Now we believe in oxygen. But this isn't a matter of progress. This is a matter of, there are things we've established. It's almost more like mathematical theorems. You prove something, and once it's proven, nobody comes back and proves it's false. You see? And true theology builds like that. There are basic premises that establish the whole thing and each of the details of what we believe and why we believe, and that's what we have to do. And the Sede Vacante volume is to start going through a number of theological manuals, standard pre-Vatican II theological manuals. And so we do that, and you actually find out a great deal about our situation. And I think maybe part of the problem is that even a lot of the heroes of our account, like I said, this doesn't get into personalities barely at all, because this isn't about personalities. The resurrection is about people, personalities. This is about the theology. But when you get into the theology, what you find is that there's still, though, kind of a personal reaction sometimes people can have. And I can only guess some of it. But you think, here's these heroes knocking themselves out, keeping the true faith, providing for their congregations, all the sacraments, the teaching, basically everything the church has always provided for the faithful. Like always. It's really, in fact, how much the same as it's always been, as long as you're working among the traditional Catholic community. So there they are. And yet, can they explain stuff? This is where people have to kind of have difficulty figuring stuff out. One of the things one sees, going back to the resurrection book, is that there's a number of different currents of thought that various people have about these things. Just theories, ideas, scenarios, something that people, concerned Catholics trying to figure out what has been for really pretty much almost everyone an incomprehensible circumstance. There's all these dogmas that tell us that the Catholic Church is established rock solid certain on the rock of St. Peter. And now all of a sudden you see this big organization that seems continuous to it, like it's on shifting sand. And, you build on shifting sands and the walls go backwards and askew in this way and the roof caves in and the whole building, disintegrates under the slightest pressure because it's on shifting sand and, and not on the rock, as it were, in this case, the rock of St. Peter. And how can this be? And I think people see this and they're not able to figure out why, how. Because that's, for 1900 years, from Pentecost, when the church officially founded as the Christian church as distinct from the Jewish congregation, clear up to Vatican II, that never happened. And actually, once you figure out, and I do kind of lay this out objectively, empirically in my resurrection book, and in these books, I have to try to demonstrate it ontologically, although that's more for volume 2 to do, but we get into some of that here in volume 1. We have to demonstrate ontologically that it's not the same church, it's not the same community. There is no actual continuity from the historic Catholic Church that my great-grandparents and so on further back, if they were Catholics, would have grown up in and gotten married in, or some of them became priests and bishops in and so forth, versus, what passes for the Catholicism of the, your local Saint Miscellaneous is today. And so we get that difference. You say, how did this happen?
How did it happen?
We have to lay out what are the dogmas, and that's what I do. I just have all these doctrines where what have the theologians had to say about this aspect, what do they have to say about indefectibility of the church, that it can't be destroyed or changed, infallibility of the Pope, we've already mentioned that, the authority of the Pope, and also under him the bishops and so forth of the church. And then also, finally, what we get to is a big section on this is devoted to what we call the marks of the church. One, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. What do these things mean? Why do we have them? So there's a lot that theology tells us about these things. And so when you put all of this information together, you can do it. You can actually solve a great deal about what it is that has gone wrong. apparently either at or near Vatican II, and it turns out it is at. But I kind of have to not presume that as I write the book until I get to the point where I can talk about in Volume 2 exactly what in Vatican II did it and how did it do that. So that's where I could drill into that. I kind of mentioned it in the Resurrection book, but it's kind of common, ordinary person level. Here we'll drill into it, theologically and intensively. This is a theological manual. This is not ordinary reading, but this would be for people who they like the history of the Catholic Church now, as far as we see in the Resurrection, or they find a traditional parish somewhere and they say, this is really neat, but how does this exist? Where is its canonical place? And these are legitimate questions. And people haven't addressed that. Even priests and bishops who should have addressed this haven't, I think, because I don't believe that anyone really expected that the standard old theological manuals would really have much, if anything, to speak to our situation. They do. They have a tremendous amount. But you have to know what to look for. If you don't know what to look for, you're plowing through all this stuff, and all you're seeing is, on the one hand, it's dogmatic. It can't change. And then here's all this will-be change going on, and they're just kind of looking at that, trying to come up with something, well, it's the same, but not really. It's exactly the same thing, but completely different, kind of stuff like that. The explanations are creative sometimes, but that's a part 2. So part 1, we're drilling into the dogmas themselves. What do they say? So that's kind of my 30,000, and I guess it's also occurring to me, if you don't mind me asking a question of myself for right now. I say, well, what is your status as a theologian? And that's a fair question to ask, because I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm not officially trained per se, just very well read, and also able to read and see through what's going on, and most importantly, put it all together into a cohesive whole, which I've never seen anybody else do, even till now. But what about, there's all these grand theological schools that have been there for centuries, and even many doctors of the church and brilliant minds, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Alphonse Liguori, and, all these great doctors of the church and other great theological, catechists and, manual writers and so forth, are brilliant minds. But they have the benefit of it also being the education, the training, but they left behind a lot of good books. But I'm realizing here, isn't there some expert? I wish there was. I really wish there was. And maybe if I could have somehow been in this, 3 decades earlier, I probably could have at least found some people who were, some priests or somebody who had been trained way back when, and at least had actual real training to work with. But that doesn't exist. You can say, well, what's wrong with these schools? They did all these great minds. Are they all of a sudden stupid? And I figured out, here's what to compare to. This isn't in the book, but I kind of think it'll explain things. In Russia, the science of biological genetics, we study about DNA and genes and, recessive gene, dominant genes, all these different, things by Mendel, I believe it was. Mendel was the biologist who came up with a lot of this stuff. And then you get to Crick and the molecule of DNA and all that good stuff. But in Russia, for a big chunk of the 20th century, they had this thing called Lysenkoism, based on this guy called, I wrote it down, I can't remember his name, Trofim Lysenko, who had basically persuaded Stalin that his idea of genetics should prevail in Russia. It did, so long as Stalin was around, and for some while afterwards, too. And to some small degree, I think it still kind of exists. Now, Lysenkoism is basically a pseudoscience. It's junk. It's garbage. It's based on the long-abandoned idea that Lamarck was this guy who came up with this idea that, well, if you cut the tails off of mice, the children will not have tails, or at least they'll have shorter tails. And maybe if you just keep doing this, you'll have mice that are born without tails. Never worked, but somehow they insist on believing it anyway. So that pseudoscience just injured the whole study of biology in Russia. You couldn't really study. You could be knowledgeable. You could learn the lessons and have all these letters after your name, and subjectively you really believe you earned them. And you're very, very educated. But today, these same once great seminaries are similarly dominated by the false positions of Vatican II. Vatican II is to real Catholic theology what Lysenkoism was to standard, biology and genetics. If you're going to put this thing in the middle of your study and insist on it, you're going to end up with a lot of nonsense and gobbledygook, no matter how well you understand it, no matter how well you can explain it, no matter how many letters you get after your name, and no matter how wise and intelligent you may in fact personally be as a human being. So the real question is, where you find a real theologian? In the traditional community, a lot of us struggle, but we have the same thing, nothing more than what I have, which is just I have the standard theological manuals. And that's what I base my book on. And that's what, my book on. That's where I get all of my theology. And I've also seen theology abuse. This is one last thing, due diligence. It's easy to find a quote out of context to prove anything you want. I've seen that done. I have a history of watching people do that, and it looks persuasive. And then you look up the quoted context, and it doesn't mean at all what somebody was trying to make it sound like it means. But if you get a longer section where you allow the theologian, the scholar, whoever, to speak at length to an issue, there's really no way to misquote it anymore. And that's kind of an important thing I also do. I like to have someone longer quotes that just sit at the feet of these great minds of the church and just drink it in. And if you do that, you come to a conclusion. So that, in a nutshell, is what that book is all about. We can move into questions.
Who's the book for? Why did you structure the way you did, and who's the book for?
Let's start with the book for. There's kind of two things I'm trying to explain here. One is the Sede Vacante circumstance itself. It's one thing to show that the guys we've had in Vatican City, basically from Vatican II onward, somehow don't meet the parameters for a pope. You can show fairly straightforwardly, if you're willing to drill into some theology, that clearly they cannot be popes. They have proven extremely fallible, and so on. So that means, even heretics. And, a heretic really absolutely cannot be pope. So how do you get that? Well, that's why you say, well, they're not really popes. No matter what people may be fooled into thinking or whatever, they're just not popes. That said, however, like I said, that takes probably more theology than the ordinary man in the street might be expected to know. That's why I say I don't expect everybody to figure all this stuff out or be ready to enter into these kinds of questions. I understand and respect that. But that doesn't mean they know something I don't. It just means they got a life to live, and they can't really take all the time to drill into this. They're not in college anymore. They're out in a job, working a profession, feeding their family. They got a life to lead. So that's why we kind of can't drill into that. But if you want to get into it, if you need to, and one of the communities or several communities, I should say, among the traditional community as a whole, have figured this out, that these Vatican leaders have not been real popes in the strictly successor of Peter sense of that word. Mm-hmm. Now, that being the case, again, it's like the thing of commentary. We're not just saying they're bad popes. We're saying they're unpopes, non-popes, which is a whole different thing. But that finding by itself, it explains a lot. It helps a lot. It means we don't have to be afraid if they get it in their head to excommunicate us or anything else, because we know they're not speaking from the position of the chair of Peter. But we still have to explain the whole greater context of that. How is that the case? Where is the church? These are the tough issues that need to be got into. So I need to get into that issue to explain the Sede Vacante, and also just to explain the overall situation that Catholics have found themselves in since Vatican II. How do we explain it doctrinally? Here it is.
Let me ask you this: when was the last valid pope, according to your research?
For sure, valid pope, as far as a pope we could follow without question, would be Pope Pius XII.
Okay.
Some suspicion hovers over John the 23rd. Either, he may have been part of the whole thing that was bad or something, but at the same time, it's not clear. Maybe he was, he doesn't come across as very bright. I don't think he was. I think he's probably just not bright enough to tell the difference between what's right and wrong. He doesn't know his right hand from his left, kind of a thing. So you don't know what he is. He may or may not be. there's some things he did that I think were either good or at least well meant. There's other things that are not. But the biggest problem was he said, let's have a council for no good reason. That didn't finish in his day. So at least in his day, the council didn't spew anything out. They had all these things they were going to promulgate, and then he just took everything that was going to be there and just shot it all down. Everything was gone. The council should have been over. Then he died. Wow. And now Paul VI comes in, and rather than, okay, well, the council's over, it didn't do anything, let's just get on with life, he says, let's open it up again. Well, we've got nothing to do it. Well, we'll do it anyway. And they came up with all the stuff that Vatican II did promulgate that just made a mess of everything and was itself a mess. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of that's where it all went wrong. So Paul VI certainly could not have been a pope when he was promulgating Vatican II. I leave open the question, was he a pope on his election? Did he therefore lost it? Or maybe he's got a background that's pretty pathetic, of heresy, of intrigues against the church. One could even doubt that he was even validly elected, as a pope. That means he would never have been a pope. It doesn't matter which way. The clear thing is by the time he's given us stuff from Vatican II, he is showing that he is not a pope. And so at that point, we know that he's not. And the thing is, the successors have been successors in that same role, that same new organization that really Vatican II created in parallel to the real church. So all of his successors have been that. So through no fault of their own, they're not popes either. So there it is. That's part of that greater context. Those are my purposes. Now, who was this really for? My first target audience. Go on. My first target audience would be Eaters of the Resurrection book, and the other would be just others, especially either seminarians who want to kind of better understand what they're going to do by becoming a traditional priest, as well as just any other concerned Catholic who looks at the mess and wants to see, here's another explanation. Let's see if this makes sense. Yeah, everyone has a right to do that. Okay, sorry I cut you off there.
So, how does your book and your studies fit with other Catholics? Are you somebody that they want to burn at the stake, or is there somebody that they're like, hey, he has some points? Are you creating fighting words here, maybe?
Well, some people will probably find something in here that could be fighting words. All that happens is you don't understand what you see. Somebody comes up with an idea. It sounds kind of good. And some of them are actually fairly clever. I will give them that much credit. Some of them have been developed by very intelligent minds. But they're scrambling in the dark. They're clawing and scratching at something they don't know what it is. So what they do is they think, well, this must be it. And they kind of start to settle on it almost like it's dogmatic, even though if you really look at all the ramifications of, let's say this particular idea of what went wrong is the right one. There's a lot of doctrines you ought to fit this to. I will have identified those doctrines in this book, and that just goes to show that you need to go back to the drawing board. And I don't like, some people don't like that, and I don't blame them for that. But it does kind of create confusion, and people get ensconced in their particular communities right now because there is no real pope. If they had a real pope, the pope would say, okay, we're all going to get along together. We're going to solve this answer. We're going to come up with an answer. This is what it was, but this is all an ollie oxen free for whatever ideas or school of thought or, Episcopal lineage. That's another issue of various areas in the church and so forth in the church, and just say, this is ollie oxen free, let's just come together. And we know what we believe in. We know what we want to see happen. We know it has to happen. Let's just get on with it. So
get on with it, as it were.
Yeah.
So it's interesting topics you broached here. Is the book? Why does the book move from doctrines to deductions at a point in the book?
So this is what happens: is that when you're researching anything, history. Any of the kinds of areas of scientific or quasi-science, usually soft sciences, you want to start with surveying the available literature. You learn what is already said. And then once you've got that, you can start making deductions from what you know, what you've established. So if you haven't established the basics, you're making deductions in thin air. It's a castle in the air. You can't just say this is true, and they can say, well, prove it's true. You got to dig back at, okay, here's this thing. This is true. Can you see that? Okay, and here's this thing, and this, and this, and this, and this. And then you put these things together, and some things will follow. See, since these things are true, can you see how deductively these other several things follow from that? And okay, it's like mathematical theorems. You start with the basics of the basic theorems until you start getting to the point where you're able to start putting together some newer theorems that are based directly on the existing theorems. So that's what the deductions is about.
Oh, wow. So one other question do I have for you here. What is the authority of the traditional clergy so important to you?
Okay.
In general.
Well, authority is an important thing that runs through the whole warp and woof of the church. It always has. The point was Jesus gave to Peter a specific role to confirm the brethren. He didn't give that role to any of his other apostles because he was the one to be the final arbiter on any question that could come up among his various apostles and other disciples. So there was always that. And then as the church continues on, Peter, of course, dies and has to be replaced. The church has to replace him and so on. And with the other apostles also, they could be picked by the Pope or sometimes by various other algorithms as a Pope could approve. And so on it goes. So everything's always authority. So if you have the top down, you start with God, he says what he says, it's all in the Bible and so forth. Then he talks to the Pope. And the Pope is infallibly guarded. He then talks to the bishops, who have to talk to the priests, who talk to the individual Catholics and so forth. And the parents talk to their children. I mean, there's a chain of authority here. And it always works when people obey. He starts with obeying God at the top and has to continue with obedience all the way down. So that's how you get the house built on rock. In this case, the rock of St. Peter, the church, that house, you see. But when you get disobedience at any level, stuff doesn't work very well. So whether you're Adam and Eve eating from the tree you were told not to, or whether you're, King Saul, who refused to, kill off a certain person that God told him to kill off some, I forget who he was now on the top of my head, but you know what I mean. Whatever it might be, when you disobey, you lay yourself open for stuff to go wrong. Your house is on shifting sand. Vatican II really was all about, it didn't look like it, but it really amounted to, let's just do our own ideas rather than what God tells us. So that disobedience there is at, practically the very top levels. So once you got that disobedience can't command you with any real authority to do what they want you to do because they're already disobeying and then they want you to disobey. It doesn't work that way. It has failed. But in the church, you see, the obedience is always still there and still carries the authority. So that's how you have the house that is on the foundation of solid rock. And that's basically what that's all about. So obedience is important. Oh, by the way, if you want to elect a pope, I said, well, we need cardinals. Well, there haven't been any cardinals since the last of them died off. Who knows how long ago? I mean, real cardinals appointed by a real pope. So what do you have? That role evolves to the next level down, basically bishops. Now, bishops can do this stuff, and they can if there's nobody higher. It's like you run a business, the manager would normally be here, but the manager's out sick today. Well, I'm kind of the assistant, so I'm in charge today. Okay, things are slow. You can take the afternoon off. I'm not the manager, but since the manager's not around, I'm having to kind of run things till the manager gets back. You see what I mean? It's still the manager. There's always that authority, and it can devolve if it has to. So that's how that would work. But if you don't have any authority, you can't say, I have these, this is my flock. I'm a bishop. And this is my flock. And I could say to them, I've been, I recognize so and so as a pope because we and my fellow bishops have held a conclave. We followed all the procedures possible for this situation. So and so is our pope. He's your pope too. We will be saying our masses in union with that pope and doing everything else in union with that pope. And the next bishop says the same thing to his flock, and so on, all down the line. You see, if you don't have authority, all you have, and people have tried to do this, it's a bunch of laity who just got to think, oh, there's no authority left. It's all gone. That's impossible. But you see, if you understand the doctrines, you realize that's impossible. So you're already in a false position. You say, well, maybe we just kind of elect somebody to be our pope. There's been at least half a dozen efforts along this line, and not a one of them has given us anything at all like a real pope. They've kind of turned into jokes. So why did they fail?
Mm-hmm.
Have I what? Go on.
So my next question for you was, now you have a second book on this book. I don't know if you want to tease that out a little bit and what you talked to there.
I can tease it out a little bit here. I mean, I got a spare copy here. And it looks almost the same, except it's got 2 lines because it's the second volume and a longer title. The Lumen Gentium Theory about our present ecclesial circumstance. So where the first is dogma and things that directly, logically deduce directly from our existing dogmas, then we have to get into the area of the real theorizations. What is a real theory? How do we explain what's going on? So I have mine. I ventured in a fair amount of detail. There have been quite a number of others, and I talk about these. And it's interesting to test the various ideas that have been come out with as against the doctrines we found in the first volume. So that is a tiny nutshell is what the second volume, is about. So that's what it is. They're kind of like companions, because even the deductions are still, even if they don't immediately come directly from the sources, they do logically directly flow from things that did come from the sources. Now, as we get to a theory, we posit a theory. This is what I believe happened. These are the reasons I believe it. These are the evidences, and so on. And then let's see how this idea fits against what was actually seen. And the fit is astonishingly good and doesn't bring up any doctrinal issues at all. So that, to me, should mean something. All these others, clever theories, some of them, brilliant ideas, maybe in some cases even scenarios that might one day arise in the future. So, I mean, it's not a waste of time that people have thought of these things. That's not what's happening now. But they can be useful to know in the future. How would we know? What would be the situation? How would we test for these kinds of things? You test it always against the established doctrines of the church. And I think I've got enough of them in Volume 1. I don't know, maybe people could find more, but there's an awful lot there in Volume 1. And that really is what we do. So they're kind of 2 halves of a work. But the first volume, I don't see how anyone can really disagree with part 1 without showing that they can't understand logic, or that they don't agree with what the theologians have written, or I don't know what else, how else, someone could criticize it, So that's what we got there. And that's the essence of all of that. There I go.
Wow. Yeah. What are the scenarios which have been ventured by concerned Catholics? You ever tried going to the Vatican or reaching out to the Pope and seeing if maybe, you can get I'm going to give you an audience there so you can debate your point?
Yeah, he'd be interested to read these sorts of things. He doesn't even read or study the manual like well.
You might disappear into the basement of the Vatican.
Yeah.
And never be seen again.
Oh yeah, and discover, here's where they hid the real Paul VI, who's miraculously still alive, not the fake one that everybody saw who created Vatican II. That's one of the more wacky ideas that's actually been ventured by some people. But there are doctrinal issues with that. I actually take it seriously and look at it doctrinally. Could that happen? Potentially. Is that now? Not this time. No, absolutely not this time. So I kind of, let's see, now that you're asking about that, comparison of other theories. Now, I've got 5 basic categories. There's actually about 23 different scenarios, but they all group into about 5 categories. And one would be absolute identity between the present-day Vatican apparatus and the historic Catholic Church. That's obviously very problematic, because now you have to explain a church that is on shifting sand. But it's an idea, and some people have ventured that. Next one, amalgamation of the present-day Vatican apparatus and the traditional Catholics, as if somehow they're both kind of like different parts of the church or something. That the church is not unified within itself. There's one obvious failing of that. Number 3, absolute identity between the traditional Catholics and the historic and real Catholic Church. That's actually where I believe the truth is to be found. If you just go with the traditional Catholics, period, you find a very intact and integral Catholic Church. 4, identity of historic and real church with unknown and or unknowable clerics. Sometimes you get these people who venture, well, somewhere there's some untainted bishop who's 110 years old, and he was made a bishop by a real pope, and he has a kind of authority that none of the rest of us can have. No, even if somebody lived that long, which I seriously doubt by now, and he wouldn't. But there's other ideas along that idea in this category. And finally, there'd be the belief that the historic and real church has disappeared. Either that it's gone and that's how it is, the end of the world's going to come so soon it won't matter, or else we have to restore it, either by having somebody have a vision. Oh, I got a heavy revy. God laid the papal mitre on my head, and I realized I'm to be the next pope. And I take the name of Hannibal the VIII, Hannibal the VIII. Hannibal the VIII he is, huh? Nobody else saw this, Or you could have an election. I've talked about what happens when just some lay people try to do elections, and it failed. The authorities of the church have to be able to do it. And who are these authorities, and where did they get the authority? That's why that's so important. That's why I have a whole appendix back in volume 1 where I discuss this authority specifically. Okay.
Well, it's quite complicated. I mean, I never realized.
It is. It's a lot to know, and these are not meant for everybody. They're not meant for the common. This is not, a casual read. You're expecting a nice Agatha Christie classic, and you're looking at this going, "Whoa!" Not that there's anything right or wrong. And most people kind of look at that and says, I don't know how to evaluate this because I'm not a theologian. I'm not this. I'm not that. That's how people might feel. And I understand. You can learn some stuff. And the great thing is, I know no matter how much you dig into the standard theology, you won't learn anything different, not from standard theology. You just won't. You'll learn to see the same points expressed different ways by the various different theologians. But it's always the same truths, the same facts.
Always comes down to the same truth and facts. So as we go out, what else maybe haven't I asked you about? What else have we missed? So we get an idea of anything there that we got, or if we got it all in the can.
Well, I don't know. I'm thinking we pretty much have it in the can. Let me see my notes, see if there's anything else we didn't address and probably should have. We talked about Sede Vacante, who's it for, how's it structured. The marks of the church are really important. I think a little commentary on the marks of the church might be worthwhile, and then I think that'd be a good time to cut out. So the marks of the church, one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. I spent a number of chapters in my volume 1 discussing each of these marks one by one. And there's also attributes associated with each mark. The marks are something special. See, if you wanted to say, how do you know the true church? A person could come up with any arbitrary criteria. Well, the true church would do A, B, C, and D, and E. And oh, by the way, my group does all of A, B, C, and D, and E. So therefore, we're the true church. But where does that come from? What authority does that have? The point is the marks of the church, as distinct even from attributes of the church, is that the marks of the church are meant in and of themselves to prove something supernatural. The unity of the church is a miraculous thing that even the material interruption we're enduring now, like unto that of the first great Western Schism when we had 2 and then 3 papal claimants for a while, but they all came back together and so forth. Even something like that doesn't stop the church from having its mark of unity. Obviously, it's more visible and we don't have crazy stuff like that going on, but it's clearly there and clearly evidenced. The mark of holiness, the sanctification of the lives of the saints and the sainted people that that the church makes of people. The church made many saints down through the years, and not just the ones on the calendar or even known in the collections of lives of the saints. There's lots of saints. And then, and then there's also Catholicity. Catholicity is about being whole and entire. It's meant for the whole world, and it's also meant for the meant to be the whole of the teaching of Christ. You don't cut little pieces out that you don't like. You say you have to take it all. You take the whole thing, you might as well throw away the whole thing. You get bits and pieces of it because, well, I like this piece and that one, but forget the rest. You can't do that. That's not Catholic. So that's another point. And then finally, you get down to the apostolic. Is our teaching that of the apostles? Are we one person legally and ontologically with the apostles in terms of that whole chain of authority down through the ages? You keep that chain unbroken, you have apostolicity. You break that chain anywhere by usurping it or deserting your office or whatever, by not doing what you're supposed to do, but something contrary, you say that breaks that chain. So authority has to be passed on all the way through, step by step by step, all the way to whoever is trying to lead now, because that's the only ones that can have any real authority in the church. So those marks are very, very important. And in a way, there's something kind of miraculous about them. You couldn't imitate these with some other church, not in the sense that the church understands these marks. So they are like an evidence, not only to tell us which church is the true one, but also to actually prove in a way, in an evidentiary sort of way, that it's the church itself. That this isn't just by human beings. Human beings can make societies all they want, but this is something started by God, and it shows and echoes that the results of being something created by God. So the marks are very important, and they're really the best way to know, is my parish Catholic? If it bears these marks, as I understood in the theologians, then it is. If it doesn't bear these marks, then it isn't. And one tiny parenthetical thing I put in here too, and it's another one from the theologians. The marks go together. There's no such thing as, well, I got 3 of the marks, but not all of them, or 1 of the marks or something. There's no such thing. You got them all, or you got none of them. It's kind of strange, but true. So that's one other little observation. But it is, that's not really that strange. There's reasons for that. And actually, one of the theologians I quote explains why and how that should be the case. But people may not always know that or be aware of that. So it's just another little tidbit from my first volume. Okay. Anything else?
No, that should do it. So as we go out, give people final pitch on to pick up the book wherever books are sold.
Final pitch is if you want to understand, or at least to be able to explore this whole weird situation and to be able to try to understand it, and you got the time to really think through a lot of these, dogmatic and doctrinal issues and digest this, it'll probably be a slow read, but you'll come at the end of it. It's like an education is what it is. I mean, I've brought out most specifically those teachings that are most relevant to our situation in one way or another, but they all come in a larger work from larger works that have a lot of things to tell us that are worth reading in their own right. So that's kind of the idea. It's a great introduction to what the standard theologians can tell us about all of these issues, and that can really, help people know what's going on. If you're really that into drilling into all of this stuff, not everybody's ready for that. That's fine, but there it is. It's a specialized work.
Specialized.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it there, Griff.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you having me on. All right.
And thanks, Arnaz, for tuning in. Order the book wherever fine books are sold. It's called Sede Vacante, Part 1, Dogmatic Ecclesiology Applied to Our Times, out May 24th, 2017. And hopefully we'll get some people that maybe they're Catholic and they can give you their thoughts as well. And it'd be kind of interesting to see a discussion there. So, well, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss1, the TikTok and all those crazy places on the internet. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the most amazing, intelligent podcast ever made to improve your brain and your life. Warning, consuming too much of the Chris Voss Show podcast can lead to people thinking you're smarter, younger, and irresistible sexy. Consume in regularly moderated amounts. Consult a doctor for any resulting brain bleed.
All right, that should have us out. Great show.